Millionaire followed the cleaner during lunch and was shocked by what he saw. Marcus Thompson was watching from his 20th floor office window when he noticed something that piqued his curiosity. For weeks, always at the same time, the building's cleaner would leave carrying a simple lunchbox and disappear through the streets of New York City during her lunch break. It was when he decided to discreetly follow her that he discovered something that would change his life forever. Grace Marie, the 50-year-old woman who had been cleaning the offices for over 2 years, wasn't eating alone. Sitting under a tree in Times Square, she was sharing half of her food with an elderly man who wore expensive clothes but had a lost and confused look in his eyes. Marcus watched from a distance, hidden by the shadow of a nearby building. The scene he witnessed left him intrigued. The cleaner was talking affectionately to the elderly man, as if they were old acquaintances, but there was something strange about that situation. The man didn't respond properly to questions, just nodded his head and smiled vaguely. "Mr. William, today I brought that coxina you liked yesterday," said Grace, taking a clean napkin from her bag and extending half of her lunch to the elderly man. The businessman moved closer, pretending to wait for the bus at the nearby stop. What intrigued him most was noticing that the man's clothes, although wrinkled, were from very expensive brands. An Italian suit that cost more than the cleaner's annual salary. "Do you remember what we talked about yesterday? About your family?" Grace asked with infinite patience. The elderly man looked at her with empty eyes and replied something incomprehensible. Marcus realized there was something very wrong with that situation. How did a simple cleaner know a man who clearly had resources but was in a state of mental confusion? During the following days, Marcus developed the habit of going out for lunch at the same time, always observing the daily meeting in the square. Grace would arrive promptly at 12:15, look for the elderly man who was usually sitting on the same bench, and share her meal with him. The woman's dedication was impressive. She brought extra napkins, cleaned the man's face when necessary, and even helped him eat when he showed difficulties. Marcus had never witnessed such selfless kindness. "Mrs. Grace, you're so good to me," murmured the elderly man in a moment of greater clarity. "Don't worry, Mr. William, everyone needs help sometimes," she replied, adjusting his coat that had slipped from his shoulders. Marcus noticed that the cleaner always skimped on her own meal to ensure the elderly man ate properly. While he received the best part of the lunch, she contented herself with plain rice and some pieces of vegetables. Intrigued, the businessman began to discreetly ask questions about Grace in the building. He discovered she was a widow, mother of 3 young children, and worked not only as a cleaner in the building but also took on extra jobs at night to supplement the family income. "She's one of the most dedicated employees we've ever seen," commented Mrs. Dorothy, the cleaning supervisor. "She's never absent, never complains, and always leaves everything impeccable. She's a hard-working woman." Marcus began to observe Grace during her work in the building too. She performed her tasks with quiet efficiency, always polite to everyone, but maintaining a respectful distance. She wore her always clean and well-pressed green uniform, hair tied in a simple bun, and carried with her a natural dignity that stood out. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. This really helps us who are just starting out. Now continuing. Marcus's curiosity turned into obsession when he noticed the elderly man was carrying some objects that seemed valuable. An antique gold watch, a ring with engraved initials, and a fine leather wallet, though empty. How did someone with those belongings end up relying on the charity of a cleaning lady? "Mr. William, you need to try to remember something about your life," Grace insisted during one of the lunches. "Any detail could help us find your family." The man looked at her with gratitude, but his eyes showed deep confusion. Sometimes he would murmur incomprehensible names or fragments of sentences that made no sense. Grace wrote everything down in a small notebook, hoping to find clues about his identity. Marcus decided to investigate more deeply. He hired a private investigator to uncover information about Grace's personal life and the circumstances that led her to care for that elderly man. What he discovered left him even more intrigued. Grace Marie Carter, 49 years old, originally from Pennsylvania, widowed for 3 years after losing her husband in a work accident. Mother of 3 children. Ashley, 15 years old, Ryan, 12, and Emily, 8. She had been working as a cleaning lady at the Thompson building for 2 years and 4 months, always with exemplary punctuality and impeccable references. The investigator also revealed that she lived in a simple house in the South Bronx neighborhood, in the eastern part of New York City. A small house, but always very clean and organized, where she raised her children with a lot of love and discipline. Neighbors described her as a reserved, hard-working, and extremely generous woman. "She always helps those in need, even though she doesn't have much," said Mrs. Patricia, a neighbor for years. "I've seen her sharing food with families going through hard times. She's a person with a very big heart." But the most surprising information Marcus received was about how Grace met the elderly man. According to the investigator, she found him about 4 months ago, wandering confused through the streets near the Port Authority bus terminal. The man was disoriented, without identification, unable to say his name or explain how he had gotten there. Grace was returning from an extra cleaning job when she found the elderly man sitting alone at a bus stop in heavy rain. He was shivering from the cold and seemed completely lost. Instead of ignoring the situation or simply calling the authorities, she approached to offer help. "Are you okay? Do you need anything?" she had asked that first night. The man just looked at her with frightened eyes and murmured something about not being able to remember where he lived. Grace, even knowing she didn't have the resources to help, couldn't leave him in that situation. She bought a sandwich and a hot coffee, sat down next to him, and tried to talk until she understood better what was happening. When she realized that he really had nowhere to go and couldn't communicate properly, Grace made a decision that would change her life. She took the elderly man home that early morning, set him up on the living room sofa, and decided to care for him until she found a solution. Grace's children were initially confused by the stranger's presence at home, but they soon grew fond of the gentle man their mother had rescued. Ashley, the oldest, helped take care of him when her mother needed to work. Ryan and Emily treated him as if he were a loving grandfather. "Mum, why doesn't he remember anything?" asked Emily, the youngest, with the typical innocence of children. "Sometimes people get sick and forget things, honey, but that doesn't mean they're bad. It means they need more affection and patience," explained Grace, teaching her children values that Marcus secretly admired. During the first weeks, Grace tried to locate the elderly man's family through official channels. She visited hospitals, health centers, and even police stations, hoping to find someone who was looking for him. She made posters with his picture and put them up in the neighborhoods near where she found him. But she got no response. It was as if the man didn't exist to the world, as if he had neither past nor future, only a confused present and the unexpected kindness of a woman who decided not to abandon him to his fate. Marcus discovered that Grace had spent a significant portion of her savings trying to properly care for the elderly man. She took him to private medical appointments when the public system proved too slow, bought expensive medications that could help with his neurological condition, and even purchased new clothes when the ones he wore became too worn out. "Mom, we don't have money for these expensive appointments," Ashley had questioned, worried about the family's financial situation. "Honey, if it were your grandfather lost out there, wouldn't you want someone to take good care of him?" Grace replied, with the simple wisdom that guided her decisions. Grace's dedication went beyond physical care. She began taking the elderly man for walks in the park on Sundays, showed him pictures from magazines trying to spark some memory, talked with him about various topics, hoping to find some subject that would awaken memories. She treated him with the dignity that any person deserves, regardless of their mental condition. Marcus observed these daily acts of care with a mixture of admiration and perplexity. How could someone with so few resources demonstrate such generosity? How could Grace maintain patience and kindness, even when the elderly man went days without being able to communicate properly? The answer came when Marcus witnessed a conversation between Grace and a friend during her work break in the building. "Grace, you're sacrificing too much for this gentleman. Your children need you too," her friend warned. "Jennifer, you don't understand. When I look at him, I remember my father, who we lost when I was little. If he were alive and needed help, I would want someone to take good care of him. That's all. I can't abandon someone who needs me," Grace explained, with a sincerity that deeply moved Marcus. This revelation made Marcus understand that Grace's motivation wasn't superficial pity, but a deep emotional connection based on her own experiences of loss. She saw in the confused elderly man an opportunity to offer the care she wished her own father had received. Marcus began questioning his own attitudes toward others' suffering. How many times had he passed by people in difficulty without offering help? How many times had he chosen to ignore problematic situations because it was more convenient? The comparison with Grace's attitude made him uncomfortable. The businessman also noticed that Grace never talked about her financial difficulties to get extra resources to care for the elderly man. She simply cut personal expenses, worked overtime, and reorganized family priorities without complaining or seeking recognition for the sacrifice. "Mom, you're losing weight. Are you eating properly?" Ashley asked during a simple dinner at home. "I am eating, honey. I'm just a little tired from work," Grace lied to avoid worrying her children about the fact that she was skimping on her own meals to ensure the elderly man received a diet appropriate for his condition. Marcus discovered through the investigator that Grace had sold some personal jewelry, including her wedding ring, to pay for more detailed medical tests for the elderly man. She hoped these tests would reveal clues about his condition and perhaps help in recovering his memories. This information deeply impacted Marcus. The ring represented the only physical memory Grace had of her deceased husband, but she chose to sell it to help a stranger. What kind of person makes that sacrifice without hesitation? During one of his discreet observations in the square, Marcus witnessed a particularly touching moment. It began to rain unexpectedly during lunch hour, and Grace immediately took off her jacket to protect the elderly man, getting herself wet as they searched for shelter. "Don't worry about me, Mrs. Grace. You'll catch a cold," murmured the elderly man in a moment of clarity. "I'm used to the rain, Mr. William. What matters is that you don't get sick," she replied, holding the jacket over his head as they looked for a covered spot. Marcus watched the scene from inside his car, protected and warm, while feeling small before the greatness of that simple woman. She demonstrated a nobility of character that all his wealth couldn't buy. At that moment, Marcus made a decision that would change the course of history. He could no longer just observe passively. He needed to better understand who that elderly man was who received so much care from Grace, and perhaps find a way to help without revealing that he had been observing the situation for so long. Marcus began his own investigation into the elderly man's identity. He hired a private investigator, specialized in missing persons, and provided a detailed description of the man, including details about the personal items he carried. The investigator worked with surprising efficiency. In less than a week, Marcus received a report that left him completely shocked. The elderly man whom Grace cared for so affectionately was William Edward Harrison, 72 years old, a former real estate businessman and former partner of one of the largest construction companies in New York City. Even more shocking, William had been Marcus's mentor and partner at the beginning of his career 15 years ago. The man who now depended on the charity of a cleaning woman had been fundamental in Marcus's professional formation, teaching him everything about business and helping him build his first successful venture. Marcus was paralyzed by the discovery. William had disappeared approximately 6 months ago, after his company went bankrupt due to a series of bad investments. The bankruptcy had been devastating, resulting in the loss of all personal assets and a severe nervous breakdown that drastically affected his mental health. The report revealed that William had developed a condition of progressive dementia, worsened by the extreme stress of the bankruptcy. His children, ashamed by the family's financial situation, had placed their father in a private psychiatric clinic, but he had escaped from the institution during a supervised outing. After the escape, William had wandered the streets of New York City for weeks, surviving on the charity of strangers, until Grace found him that rainy night at the Port Authority bus terminal. During all this time, Marcus was building his fortune using the teachings he had learned from that same man who was now lost and forgotten. Marcus faced a devastating crisis of conscience. While he prospered applying the lessons William had taught him, his mentor was suffering on the streets, depending on the kindness of a woman who could barely support her own family. The irony of the situation was cruel and inescapable. The businessman recalled the times when William was his professional guide. The man had been like a father to him, teaching not only negotiation techniques but also ethical values that should guide a responsible businessman. William always said that success only had value if it was used to help other people. Marcus, my boy, always remember, when you prosper, you have the responsibility to lift up those around you. Money is just a tool to create a better world, were words William often repeated during their mentoring meetings. Now Marcus saw the hypocrisy of his own life. He had applied William's techniques to become wealthy, but completely ignored the human values he had also taught. While accumulating riches, he had lost the ability to see the suffering around him. This discovery completely changed Marcus's perspective on Grace. She wasn't just being kind to a stranger in need. She was caring for the man who had shaped her employer's professional character. Unknowingly, Grace was honoring the memory and dignity of someone who had directly contributed to the fortune that paid her salary. Marcus decided he needed to approach the situation more directly. He could no longer just stand by while Grace sacrificed herself to care for William. But he also didn't know how to reveal his connection to the elderly man without sounding insensitive or opportunistic. Marcus's first attempt to approach them was disastrous. He showed up at the square during lunchtime, pretending to be passing by casually, and tried to strike up a conversation with Grace. She was polite, but clearly uncomfortable with her employer's presence in such an informal setting. "Good afternoon, Mrs. Grace. I didn't know you had lunch here in the square," said Marcus, trying to sound natural. "Good afternoon, Mr. Thompson. I hope I'm not causing any trouble by using this public space during my break," replied Grace with the formality of someone who knows social boundaries well. "Of course not. It's your right." Marcus realized his presence was making Grace nervous, especially because she was with William. "And this gentleman?" "He's an acquaintance who needs company during meals," Grace explained vaguely, instinctively protecting William's privacy. Marcus noticed William was looking at him with a vague expression, showing no sign of recognition. Dementia had completely erased his memories of his former pupil. To William, Marcus was just a stranger in a suit who had interrupted his peaceful moment. "Have you known each other for long?" persisted Marcus, trying to find out how much Grace knew about William's past life. "A few months. He's a very dear person," replied Grace, maintaining the discretion that characterized her personality. "Now, if you'll excuse us, we need to finish our lunch because my break is almost over." Marcus realized he had overstepped polite boundaries and quickly said goodbye, but the interaction made him even more curious about how Grace viewed her relationship with William and how much she knew about his former life. Dear listener, if you're enjoying the story, please take a moment to like and especially subscribe to the channel. It really helps us who are just starting out now continuing. In the following days, Marcus observed that Grace began varying the locations where she had lunch with William, avoiding the square where they had met. She clearly didn't want any more casual encounters with her employer, preferring to keep her personal life separate from her work environment. Marcus respected Grace's space, but intensified his investigation into William's situation. He discovered that the elderly man had a frozen bank account with significant funds, blocked due to legal issues from his company's bankruptcy. There was also a property in his name in Aspen, similarly blocked by creditors. The investigator revealed that William's children had moved to other states after the bankruptcy, ashamed by the family's financial situation and unable to deal with their father's mental deterioration. They had paid for 3 months of care in a private clinic, but after that cut off all support. "It's a sad situation, but quite common in families facing drastic financial changes," explained the investigator. "Children can't accept reality and abandon their parents when they need support the most." Marcus felt guilty, realizing he had done something similar himself. When he learned of William's bankruptcy, instead of offering help, he chose to distance himself to protect his own business reputation. He had justified his omission by saying everyone should solve their own problems. The investigation also revealed painful details about William's last months before his disappearance. He had tried to rebuild his life several times, but progressive dementia and lack of family support made any recovery impossible. He had reached the point of sleeping in the abandoned company, eating poorly, and neglecting basic medical care. Marcus understood that William hadn't simply disappeared, He had been gradually abandoned by everyone who should have protected him. Family, former partners, business friends, all had stepped away when his situation became inconvenient or embarrassing. Only Grace, a woman who didn't even know him, had the compassion to take him in when he was most vulnerable. She offered not just food and shelter, but above all dignity and respect at a time when everyone else had chosen to ignore his existence. Marcus decided he needed to find a way to help without immediately revealing his connection to William. He started by making anonymous donations to institutions that cared for people with dementia, but that didn't solve the specific situation of Grace and William. Then he had an idea. He could help Grace professionally, offering better working conditions that would give her more resources to care for William. Marcus invented a fictitious promotion and raised Grace's salary, justifying the decision based on her exemplary dedication at work. "Mrs. Grace, we're recognizing your excellent work with a promotion to assistant supervisor. This includes a significant pay raise and some additional benefits," Marcus announced during a staff meeting. Grace was surprised and clearly moved by the news, but also suspicious of the coincidence. Why now, after years of doing the same work, was she being recognized? "Mr. Thompson, I truly appreciate the opportunity, but may I ask why you're giving me this promotion now?" Grace questioned with the direct honesty that characterized her personality. "Because we've observed that you always go beyond what's required. Your work is impeccable, and you demonstrate natural leadership with the other employees," replied Marcus, using truthful justifications even if they weren't the real reasons for the promotion. Grace accepted the promotion with gratitude, but Marcus noticed she continued watching him with some skepticism. She was too smart not to notice something was different in his behavior. With the salary increase, Grace was able to provide better care for William. She took him to more specialized medical appointments, bought more effective medications, and even managed to pay for some physical therapy sessions that helped improve his mobility. Marcus observed that William's condition improved visibly. He was cleaner, better fed, and showed moments of lucidity more frequently. Grace's dedication was literally saving the life of the man who had been fundamental in Marcus's professional formation. During one of these lucid moments, William surprised Grace by asking a question that left her confused. "Mrs. Grace, do you know a young man named Marcus? Marcus Thompson?" he asked, looking directly into her eyes. "Yes, I do, Mr. William. He's my boss at the building where I work." "Why do you ask?" replied Grace, intrigued by the connection. "I don't know. That name keeps echoing in my head sometimes." "As if it were important, but I can't remember why," murmured William, holding his head as if trying to force a stubborn memory. Grace became thoughtful about this connection. Was it just a coincidence that William knew her boss's name? Or was there some relationship between them that she was unaware of? She decided to investigate discreetly, asking careful questions to William in the following days. "Mr. William, when you speak of Marcus, can you remember what he was like or where you met?" Grace would ask during lunches in the square. "He was a good young man, very dedicated. I taught him things," William managed to articulate during a moment of greater clarity. "But then everything went dark in my head." Grace began to suspect there was more to the story than met the eye. The coincidence of the name, combined with the fact that Marcus had recently appeared in the square asking questions about William and then offered an unexpected promotion, created a pattern that couldn't be ignored. Marcus, in turn, was growing increasingly anxious. Several times he felt like revealing everything to Grace, confessing his connection to William and taking responsibility for the care of his former mentor. But he was afraid of her reaction, especially after discovering the depth of the sacrifices she had made. The situation became complicated when Grace decided to take William to the doctor who had treated her late husband, hoping to get a more affordable appointment. During the medical consultation, she discovered that William had been a successful businessman before developing dementia. "From the symptoms you describe and the personal items he carries, this gentleman clearly had a life of possessions before developing this condition," explained Dr. Michael, the family doctor. "Perhaps it's worth trying to locate professional or family records that could help with treatment." Grace was torn between curiosity about William's past and the fear of discovering information that might take him away from her. He had become like a member of her family, and the idea of losing him frightened her more than she cared to admit. Marcus realized that Grace was investigating William's past life when he saw her at the public library on a Saturday, looking up records of old companies and flipping through newspapers from previous years. She was determined to uncover the truth, even if it could completely change her situation. The tension escalated when Grace found a newspaper article from 2 years ago about William's company's bankruptcy. The photo was old, but she immediately recognized the face of the man she had been caring for months. The difference was shocking. In the photo, William appeared elegant and confident. In his current reality, he was fragile and confused. William Edward Harrison, former president of Harrison Construction Company, declares bankruptcy after unsuccessful real estate market investments, Grace read in the article, feeling her heart race. The article mentioned that William had been a mentor to several successful businessmen in the city, including Marcus Thompson. Grace felt the ground give way when she realized that her boss had hidden his connection to William from the start. Marcus didn't know that Grace had discovered the truth until she confronted him directly in the office the following Monday. "Mr. Thompson, we need to talk about Mr. William," said Grace, entering his office with a determination he had never seen before. "Mr. William," Marcus pretended, trying to buy time to understand how much she knew. "William Edward Harrison, your former mentor and partner, the man who taught me about business and who has been living in my house for 4 months because he has no one else in the world," said Grace with a mix of anger and disappointment in her voice. Marcus realized there was no longer any way to hide the truth. The moment he had so feared had arrived, and he needed to face the consequences of his omission. "Mrs. Grace, I can explain," began Marcus, but he was cut off by her fury. "Explain what? How could you watch me taking care of him all these months and say nothing? How could you let me sell my things to pay for medical treatment for someone you had a moral obligation to help?" said Grace, with tears of indignation in her eyes. Marcus had never seen Grace show such intense emotions. She had always been reserved and respectful, but at that moment she was clearly furious and disappointed. He realized he had completely lost her trust. "Grace, please let me explain. I found out who he was just a few weeks ago. When I learned, I was shocked and didn't know how to approach the situation without seeming—" Marcus tried to justify himself, but the words came out awkwardly. "Without seeming what? A decent human being?" interrupted Grace. "You've been watching me for months, haven't you? That's why you showed up in the square asking questions. That's why the sudden promotion. You were treating our lives as personal entertainment." Marcus realized that Grace had discovered much more than he expected. She had connected all the dots and understood that he had been observing the situation for a long time without taking any action. "It wasn't entertainment, Grace. I was impressed by your dedication and confused about how to proceed," explained Marcus, trying to find words to justify his passivity. "Impressed?" Grace laughed bitterly. "You were impressed watching a poor woman sacrifice herself to care for the man who made you rich? It must have been very comforting to watch from afar while I went hungry to feed your former mentor." The accusation hit Marcus hard. Grace had summed up exactly the cruelty of his stance. He had been a voyeur of suffering, passively observing while she sacrificed herself to care for someone who should have been his responsibility. "Grace, you have every right to be angry. I acted wrongly. But now that everything is out in the open, I can take over William's care. I can pay for the best treatments, give him all the assistance he needs," offered Marcus, trying to correct his omission. "Now, after 4 months, after I've grown attached to him as if he were my own family. You think you can just show up with your money and fix everything?" questioned Grace, even more irritated by the proposal. Marcus realized he had underestimated the emotional connection between Grace and William. To her, he wasn't just a charity case. He had genuinely become important in her life and in the lives of her children. "I don't want to take William away from you, Grace. I want to help take care of him. We can work together," proposed Marcus, trying to find a solution that respected both of their feelings. "Work together?" Grace shook her head in disbelief. "You don't understand, do you? It's not about money or medical care. It's about abandonment. You abandoned the one who needed your loyalty the most, and now you want to look good because someone else did the dirty work. The accusation of abandonment hurt Marcus deeply because it was absolutely true. When he learned of William's bankruptcy, he had chosen to distance himself to protect his own interests. He had rationalized his omission by saying that everyone should solve their own problems. "Grace, I know I failed William. I know I should have helped when he needed it most. But can't that be fixed now?" asked Marcus, trying to appeal to the generosity she had shown William. "It can be fixed, yes, but not in the way you're thinking," replied Grace, calmer but still firm. "If you really want to do the right thing, you need to understand that William isn't a problem to be solved with money. He's a person who needs love, patience, and dignity." Marcus realized Grace was testing his true motivation. She wanted to know if he was genuinely interested in William's well-being or just trying to ease his own guilt by paying for expensive care. "What do you think I should do?" asked Marcus, for the first time truly interested in her opinion instead of trying to impose his own solutions. "First, you need to apologize to him. I don't know if he'll understand because of the dementia, but you need to admit you failed as a friend and student," said Grace. "Second, if you really want to help, do it while respecting the life he's built with us over the past few months." Marcus understood that Grace was setting conditions for any kind of collaboration. She wasn't interested in a simple transfer of responsibilities. She wanted him to confront his own failures and demonstrate genuine commitment. "Can I visit him, talk to him?" asked Marcus, feeling like a child asking for permission. "You can, but not as the powerful businessman who's going to solve all the problems. As the Marcus he vaguely remembers, the student he taught who then disappeared from his life," Grace explained with a firmness that surprised Marcus. The conversation ended with Marcus understanding that there was much more at stake than simply providing financial resources. Grace had created an alternative family for William, giving him the emotional stability that no medical treatment could offer. Marcus spent the following days reflecting on his own motivations and what it truly meant to take responsibility for someone. He realized that for years he had confused financial success with human worth, believing that having money exempted him from deep emotional commitments. Marcus's first visit to Grace's house was scheduled for a Sunday afternoon. He felt more nervous than he had ever felt before a business meeting. This time it wasn't about closing contracts or impressing investors. It was about facing the consequences of his own failures as a human being. Grace's house was in a simple neighborhood but extremely well kept. The small garden was full of colorful flowers, the walls were painted with cheerful colors, and there was an overall feeling of warmth that contrasted dramatically with the coldness of Marcus's luxury apartment. Grace greeted Marcus at the door with formal politeness, but he noticed she was still keeping an emotional distance. Her children watched curiously as the man in a suit arrived to visit Grandpa William, as they had come to call the elderly man. "He's in the backyard, helping Ryan with a school project about plants," Grace explained, leading Marcus through the simple but organized rooms of the house. Marcus was surprised to see William sitting quietly in the backyard, helping a 12-year-old boy identify different types of leaves. The elderly man seemed relaxed and happy, very different from the confused man he had observed in the square for months. "Grandpa William, you have a visitor," Ryan announced naturally. William looked up and stared at Marcus with interest but showed no immediate recognition. Marcus felt a pang in his heart seeing how fragile and vulnerable his former mentor looked, but he also noticed he was much better cared for than during his observations in the square. "Good afternoon, Mr. William. My name is Marcus Thompson," he said, sitting in a simple plastic chair beside the elderly man. "Marcus," William repeated slowly, as if the name stirred distant echoes in his memory. "That name sounds familiar. Do I know you from somewhere?" "Yes, sir. We worked together many years ago. You taught me so much about business and about life," replied Marcus, emotion evident in every word. Grace watched the interaction from a distance, ready to step in if William showed any anxiety or discomfort. But to her surprise, the elderly man seemed genuinely interested in the conversation. "Ah, were you my protégé?" asked William, with a vague smile. "I always enjoyed teaching ambitious young people. I hope you learned your lessons well." "I learned the business lessons, sir, but I failed to learn the most important lessons you tried to teach me," admitted Marcus, tears welling in his eyes. "What lessons?" asked William with genuine curiosity. About loyalty? About not abandoning people when they need us most? About using success to help those who are suffering, explained Marcus, looking into the eyes of the man who had been like a father to him. William fell silent for a few moments, as if processing the information. Then, surprisingly, he reached out and gently touched Marcus's arm. "Don't worry, my boy. Sometimes it takes us longer to learn the most important lessons. What matters is that you're here now," said William with wisdom that transcended his mental condition. William's simple, direct forgiveness shattered all of Marcus's emotional defenses. He began to cry uncontrollably, releasing years of guilt and regret he had carried in silence. Grace approached and gently touched Marcus's shoulder, offering him a tissue. For the first time since learning the truth, she showed compassion toward him. "Mr. William has this ability to forgive easily. It was one of the first things I noticed about him," said Grace. "Perhaps you can learn that lesson too." Marcus looked up and saw that Grace was offering a bridge to reconciliation. She had witnessed his genuine vulnerability and was willing to give him a second chance. "Grace, I want to do things right from now on. Not just with money, but truly. I want to be present in his life like I should have been from the start," declared Marcus with a sincerity that surprised everyone, including himself. "Then you can start by helping Ryan with his school project." William was explaining to him how plants adapt to different environments. "It seems like a lesson you could use too," suggested Grace with a half smile. Marcus spent the rest of the afternoon in Grace's simple backyard, helping with Ryan's school project, talking with William about gardening, and discovering aspects of family life that his wealth had never provided. For the first time in years, he felt genuinely useful and connected to others. Ashley, Grace's eldest daughter, watched Marcus with intelligent curiosity. She had matured quickly after losing her father and had a sharp sense for judging people's character. "You're my mum's boss, aren't you?" Ashley asked directly, during a moment when Marcus was helping Emily, the youngest, sort leaves by size. "Yes, I am. Your mother is an exceptional employee," replied Marcus, trying to maintain formality. "She said you knew Grandpa William from before he got sick," continued Ashley with insight that impressed Marcus. "It must have been hard to see him like this, huh?" Marcus realized he was being subtly tested by the teenager who wanted to understand his true intentions toward the family. "It was very hard, yes, and I didn't know how to react properly," admitted Marcus, deciding to be honest with her. "My mom always says when we don't know how to help, the best thing is to ask the person what they need, instead of just thinking on his own," said Ashley with a maturity that made Marcus reflect on his own approach. Marcus realized he had received a valuable lesson from a 15-year-old teenager. Rather than observing and speculating about how to help, he should have simply asked Grace Marie what she and William needed. When it was time for Marcus to leave, William held his hand with surprising strength. "Marcus, will you come back to visit us?" asked the elderly man, with a clarity that deeply moved the businessman. "If Mrs. Grace allows it, I would very much like to come back often," replied Marcus, looking at Grace Marie for approval. "The doors of this home are open to those who come with sincere intentions," said Grace Marie. "But remember, William needs consistency. If you start visiting him, you can't just disappear when the novelty wears off." Marcus understood that he was being challenged to demonstrate long-term commitment, not just a one-time gesture of guilt or charity. Grace Marie wanted to ensure he wouldn't cause further abandonment in William's life. "I understand, and I accept that commitment," declared Marcus, feeling the weight of the responsibility he was taking on. In the following days, Marcus established a new routine. Instead of staying late at the office working on businesses that were already doing well, he began visiting Grace Marie's home 3 times a week, always in the late afternoon. Initially, the visits were somewhat formal and uncomfortable. Marcus didn't know how to behave in a simple family environment, and Grace Marie's family was still getting used to having a millionaire businessman in their living room. But William served as a natural bridge between the two worlds. During his moments of clarity, he would tell stories about Marcus's early years in business, revealing aspects of the businessman's personality that even he himself had forgotten. Marcus was always very dedicated, but sometimes he forgot to take care of himself, William told Ryan during one of the visits. "I had to remind him to eat when he was too focused on a project." "Just like Mommy," exclaimed Emily. "She also forgets to eat when she's worried about something." Marcus realized that William was unconsciously drawing parallels between him and Grace Marie, highlighting similar traits that could be the foundation of a genuine friendship. Gradually, Marcus began to understand the dynamics of Grace Marie's family better and contribute more naturally. He helped Ryan with his math homework, listened to Ashley talk about her plans for the future, and played with Emily in a way he had never experienced with children. Grace Marie observed these interactions with growing interest. She was seeing sides of Marcus she had never suspected existed: patience with children, humility to accept corrections, and genuine concern for William's well-being. "Have you never had a family of your own?" asked Grace Marie one afternoon while they were preparing tea for William. "I never prioritized personal relationships. I always thought work was more important," admitted Marcus. "Now I realize I missed many opportunities for genuine connections." "It's not too late to change that," said Grace Marie. "William always said that people can reinvent themselves at any age, as long as they have the courage to admit their mistakes." Marcus realized that Grace Marie was subtly offering hope that he could build meaningful relationships, even after years of living emotionally isolated. Marcus's transformation did not go unnoticed at work. His employees noticed that he was more present, more interested in the team's well-being, and less obsessed with numbers and deadlines. He began implementing more humane policies in the company, inspired by the example of generosity he observed in Grace Marie. "Mr. Thompson, may I share an observation?" asked his assistant during a meeting. "Of course, go ahead," replied Marcus. "You've been looking happier lately, more relaxed. The staff has been commenting on this positive change," said the assistant sincerely. Marcus smiled, realizing his new priority of relationships was reflecting positively in all areas of his life. He was learning that investing in genuine human connections brought a satisfaction that no financial success had provided. The most significant change happened when Marcus decided he wanted to share his resources more systematically. Instead of just paying for William's medical costs, he wanted to understand how he could help other people in similar situations. "Grace, do you know other families going through hardships similar to what you faced?" asked Marcus during one of his visits. "I know several." "Why do you ask?" replied Grace curiously. "I'm thinking of creating a program to help families caring for elderly people with dementia, but I don't want to do it just by sending checks. I want to truly understand how these people live and what they need," explained Marcus. Grace was surprised by the proposal. It was different from any corporate initiative she had seen before. Marcus wasn't interested in publicity or recognition. He seemed genuinely motivated by the desire to help. "If you're serious, I can introduce you to some families I know," offered Grace. "But they need to know this isn't ordinary charity, that it's someone who truly cares." "How can I show I genuinely care?" asked Marcus, showing he was willing to learn from her. "By doing what you're doing here, showing up regularly, knowing people by name, understanding their stories. Treating everyone with dignity, not as charity cases," explained Grace with the practical wisdom Marcus had learned to value. Marcus implemented this philosophy systematically. Instead of creating a traditional foundation, he established a program of regular visits to families in need, always accompanied by Grace, who served as a bridge between his world and that of the people needing help. During these visits, Marcus discovered touching stories of sacrifice and love that echoed Grace's experience with William. Women caring for husbands with Alzheimer's, children who had abandoned careers to care for elderly parents, entire families reorganizing around the needs of a vulnerable member. Every family has a unique story, but they all share the same dedication to caring for those they love, observed Grace after visiting a woman who alone cared for her ex-military husband with severe dementia. "And they all face the same difficulties: lack of resources, lack of support, and lack of recognition from society," added Marcus, beginning to understand the systemic dimensions of the problem. These experiences fundamentally changed Marcus's perspective on success and purpose. He realized he had spent decades accumulating wealth without ever questioning what so much money was for, if it couldn't be used to alleviate genuine suffering. Marcus's transformation also deeply impacted his relationship with William. The elderly man began showing more frequent moments of recognition, especially when Marcus talked about the program to help families. "You're doing exactly what I always wanted you to do, Marcus," said William during a moment of exceptional clarity. "You're using your success to help others. That makes me very proud." Marcus was moved to realize that, even with dementia, William could still recognize and value the moral growth of his former protégé. It was as if Grace's love and care had preserved the most essential aspects of the elderly man's personality. The relationship between Marcus and Grace also evolved during these months of working together. They developed a natural partnership based on mutual respect and the shared goal of taking good care of William and helping other families. "You know, you never properly thanked me for what you did for William," Marcus said to Grace one afternoon while they were organizing his medications. "I didn't do anything special. I did what any decent person would do," Grace replied with characteristic modesty. "Grace, you saved his life, not just physically, but you saved his dignity, his humanity. You gave love and care when everyone else had given up on him," Marcus insisted, "and you're doing the same thing now." "You're giving him the recognition and affection he deserves," Grace responded. "I think William taught both of us that it's never too late to do the right thing." Marcus realized Grace was right. William had become an involuntary teacher to them both, teaching her about selfless generosity and teaching him about emotional responsibility and genuine commitment to other human beings. The most touching moment of their journey happened one afternoon when William had a prolonged moment of clarity. He looked at Marcus and Grace sitting side by side and smiled with a clarity he hadn't shown in months. "You two take such good care of me," William said with a firm voice. "I don't remember many things, but I remember the affection I receive every day. That's more important than any memory from the past." Marcus and Grace exchanged glances, understanding they had received the greatest gift William could offer, the recognition that their love and care had created a present reality more valuable than any lost memory. "Grandpa William, you teach us so much too," Grace said with tears in her eyes. "You teach us about patience, about living in the present moment, about finding joy in simple things." "And you teach about forgiveness," Marcus added, "about giving second chances to people who made mistakes but want to do better." William held both their hands with surprising strength, creating a physical connection that symbolized the unconventional family they had formed together. In the following months, Marcus, Grace, and the children established a family routine that naturally included William as a central member. They had weekend picnics, watched old movies that sometimes triggered memories in William, and celebrated small achievements like more frequent moments of clarity. Marcus discovered that funding William's medical care was only a small part of his recovery. What really made a difference was the emotional stability, the caring routine, the feeling of belonging to a family that valued him regardless of his limitations. "You know what's the most beautiful thing about this whole situation?" Ashley asked Marcus one Sunday when they were all in the backyard. "What?" Marcus asked curiously. "Grandpa William doesn't remember the past, so to him, you've always been part of his life. He doesn't carry resentments or sadness. He only knows the love he receives now," the teenager explained with a depth that surprised Marcus. This observation made Marcus reflect on how dementia, despite being a devastating condition, had inadvertently protected William from the pain of abandonment. He lived in a constant present of care and affection, without the wounds of the past. Marcus's transformation completed when he decided he wanted to radically change his way of living. Instead of living alone in a luxurious, isolated apartment, he bought a large house in the same neighborhood as Grace so he could always be close to his new family. "Are you sure about this decision?" asked Grace when Marcus told her about the move. "It's such a big change in your life." "Grace, over the past few months I've learned that luxury without love is just expensive loneliness. I'd rather live simply near people who truly care about me," Marcus replied with conviction. Marcus's new house had a large backyard where William could walk safely, bedrooms prepared for the children to spend weekends, and a spacious kitchen where Grace could prepare the special meals William so appreciated. Marcus also completely changed his business philosophy. He reduced his workload to 1/3 of what it was before, delegated responsibilities to competent employees, and transformed his company into a model of social responsibility, offering decent jobs and support for employees, caring for elderly family members. "Don't you miss your previous life?" asked Ryan, curious about how a powerful businessman could choose a simpler life. "Do I miss the money I spent selfishly? No. Do I miss working late to avoid thinking about the loneliness I felt at home? Definitely not," Marcus replied with humor. "I like the life we have now much more." The family they formed became an inspiring example for the entire community. Neighbors commented about the rich businessman who had chosen to live simply to care for an elderly man with dementia, and about the courageous cleaning woman who had taught a lesson in humanity to someone much more powerful socially. The assistance program that Marcus and Grace developed together grew organically, helping dozens of families in similar situations. But they maintained the original philosophy: genuine personal relationships instead of distant charity, regular presence instead of sporadic donations. "You've changed my perspective about wealthy people," commented Mrs. Sandra, one of the families assisted by the program. "I thought all rich people were selfish, but you show that money can be used to create true friendships." Marcus and Grace smiled, knowing they had managed to create something unique, a model of assistance based on genuine love and mutual respect, where those who help and those who receive help become truly family. The story's ending came naturally and movingly. During a fall afternoon, William was sitting in the backyard of Marcus's new house, watching the children play, when he had an especially profound moment of clarity. "Marcus, Grace, come here," William called with a clear voice. They approached, accustomed to quickly responding to his calls during moments of mental clarity. "I want you to know that even when I can't remember many things, I always remember the love I receive from you," said William, looking into both their eyes. "You saved me not just from the streets, but from feeling lost in the world." Marcus and Grace were deeply moved, knowing those words represented everything they had built together. "William, you taught us that family isn't just blood. It's choice, it's care, it's constant presence," said Grace. "And you taught us that it's never too late to become a better person," added Marcus. "You gave us the opportunity to discover who we really want to be." William smiled with the serenity of someone who had found peace, even amid the confusion of dementia. He was surrounded by people who genuinely loved him, in an environment of affection and security that Grace had created and that Marcus had learned to value. "Now I can rest easy, knowing you'll continue taking care of each other," said William, closing his eyes contentedly. End of story. Dear listener, now tell me what you thought of this touching story about Marcus and Grace. Do you think Marcus made the right choices when he decided to change his life? And Grace, did she manage to show that true wealth lies in the relationships we build? Leave your comment sharing which part of the story moved you the most, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss other touching stories like this one.